Welcome to the Charlotte CBMC podcast, a series of candid conversations with area business and professional men. In this series, you'll hear how CBMC has connected businessmen to God, His Word, and each other, equipped them to grow and become godly leaders at work, in their community, and at home. Now, let's join our host for this episode of the Charlotte CBMC podcast.
Well, hello again, Charlotte CBMCers, and welcome to yet another episode of the CBMC Charlotte podcast. I am your host, Brian Bratti. I'm an executive business coach, and I'm continuing my interview with Jeff Gaura. How are you doing tonight, Jeff?
I'm well.
Awesome. You know, last episode we talked about your role as a dad. We talked about how your faith influenced that, how your leadership by example, which is biblical, influenced that. And now what we're going to do is we're going to talk about where you are now with some of the ministries and activities you're doing and kind of get some information on what Jeff Gaura is doing and what he's all about. So if you can kind of give us an idea of where you are now, we'd really appreciate it.
Sure. Fair enough. So in 2018, when I started my quote unquote second half of my life, one of the guidances I got from my consultant people, my friends, my enemies, was to make sure I'm using my gifts as best as I can. So some of the traditional gifts that you would think of in a community, like, you know, serving on a praise team or being a deacon or an elder or something like that, that didn't really fit who I was, what I wanted to do, and specifically the gifts God had given me. So I went off in a couple of different directions. So an ongoing ministry, probably the biggest event in my life, was when I discovered Christ as my Savior. I decided I wanted to figure out a thoughtful way to share that with the people of Nepal. So I was a Peace Corps volunteer, and I lived in Nepal, the country famous for Mount Everest. And I wanted to go back and share with them. You know, most people do not know Nepali. It's not a common language. You're not going to find a lot of JARS translators. Right. Specifically, I had a tribe I lived with the name the Taru, and there was no such Bible in Taru. There was no such a thing as the Bible in Taru.
Sure.
And to make matters worse, in the Nepali constitution, it states nobody can do anything to convince a person to discard his indigenous faith. So in the Himalaya, Hinduism is what you're born into. And if anybody is caught taking somebody away from Hinduism, that's a crime. That's not necessarily, you're not going to get beheaded, but you're going to go to prison for a long time. Wow. And so in general, there wasn't, a lot of successful, large named missionaries reaching out, as you might say, you'd find in Africa or places in Asia.
Sure.
So what I did early on, back as early as in the 1990s, is I began to build schools, fundraise, build schools, help with the design, installation in the valley that I lived in. So I lived in the Dong Valley, kind of near India. And over the course of the years there, we ended up building 4 schools. And a lot of those schools doubled as underground churches. So a church couldn't own a building. They couldn't have employees, things like that. Right. So by building these schools with, I guess now that I think about it, 3 of them were public schools and 1 was a nonprofit, a private school. Yeah. And that's not true. 2 were private and 2 were public. But the schools would sometimes double as a church on Saturday. Saturday was a day off in their culture. And so the churches would use these buildings that I had built, and they would hold underground services there. So they doubled as an underground church. And I did fundraising for those. I would bring blankets made from yak hair back from the Himalaya, and I would sell them. And all the proceeds would go to the school process, paying for tuition, books, fees, furniture. Everything's a lot cheaper over there. And I've been doing that on and off for 3 decades. Well, on the last trip to Nepal, we took the 6 teachers who were teaching at the latest school that we built and took them trekking into the Himalaya. It's kind of like taking teachers from Nebraska to see Rodeo Drive. They'd never otherwise see it, but they've seen it on TV. But the Himalaya, if you're a tourist, it's cheap and it's affordable. If you're a Nepali native, the act of flying there, hiking there, it's very expensive compared to living on your own land. So in general, most Nepalis never see their own country. So I took them there, and I discovered that 2 of the staff, in fact, not only were Christian, but one of the staffs, her husband was a pastor, and they had their own building. And as I started interviewing and finding out what was going on, I discovered that one of my former students, who was with us on the trip, was an elected politician. And in most countries, as you know, they don't have this separation of legislative, judicial, and executive branches. Right. It's everybody reports to a king or a prime minister or whatever. Well, the police reported to him, and he didn't have them enforce any sort of proselytizing rule. So my ministry was done. There were multiple churches with buildings and employees.
Mm-hmm.
The law still existed in the Constitution. I looked it up to confirm it. But as long as he's an elected officer, there's no underground church anymore. It's above ground, and they're thriving. And
Nice.
they sent me pictures and all that goes with it. So I closed the Napal project as a nonprofit, and I shut down the social media sites, deleted my mailing list after I did a final mailing. But that represented probably the biggest portion of my ministry. In the interim, though, or I guess I say in the interim, I've done a couple other things. I lead one of the trusted advisor forums for CBMC in Charlotte. And so we have a group of us that gather monthly, and I lead all the Bible studies there. I say, oh, that's an exaggeration. I lead a lot of the recent Bible studies, and I try to teach from Hebrew as much as I can, since most of the businessmen who attend generally don't get a Hebrew basis for scripture. We usually get a teaching taught from, a Southern Baptist, Episcopalian, Presbyterian, whatever, and everything's done in English. Yeah. Well, it's not how anything was ever written. There's no references to America in the Bible.
No.
So they generally love when I go back and I start explaining mysteries to them that they just read over the top of or put an incorrect translation on.
Yeah.
On top of that. And my wife and I teach a course. I just finished a whole course called Faith, Food, and Fitness.
Hey, tell me about that. What are the details on faith? If I would be interested in taking your faith, food, and fitness, what would I be doing? What would I be looking to do?
Yeah, so I capped the class at somewhere between 8 to 12 people. But the idea I teach there is, if you use both a blend of science and Old and New Testament, what does God say about your body and how do you do it? Right? I tell people this kind of the one sentence summary. How do you go grocery shopping as a Christian? How do I go to the gym as a believer in the Messiah? Because it's a different mindset. It's a different set of tools than what you're used to. Some of the things that are in there, you realize what they are and you avoid them.
So, give a couple examples. So, all right, just one example of how. I assume we're not going to be doing like Old Testament.
We're not. I'm going to jump right into the easy. I'll do some simplistics one-on-one.
Yeah, just an easy.
So God designs us to this. He calls this the temple, right? He wants us to keep it clean.
Yep.
And in general, we're not putting clean things in it.
Right.
A clean thing is something that you pick up and it doesn't have an ingredient list. You pick up an apple or a piece of bacon or an egg or a piece of meat, or you didn't have a list of ingredients on there. It is what it is.
Right.
You pick up something that's in a box, or for example, something in the middle aisles of a grocery store. Most people don't know what those ingredients are. They think, well, the FDA said they're legal, therefore they must be good for us. Sure. I don't know who's told them that, but whatever they're smoking, they probably need to ask them to share. Because that's not even close to accurate. You can't trust that.
So processed stuff you're talking about.
Yeah, so I teach people how not only to avoid it, but to make your own stuff and find joy in it, how to sacrifice. So I teach people how to make bread. I teach people because that's, Jesus calls himself the bread of life. The only thing he calls himself more than the bread of life is the Son of Man. Yeah. And so when I hear people say bread is bad for you, I think to myself, boy, did the enemy get a hold of them and convince them.
Okay.
Because there's no way that he would refer to himself as that. If there was a chance that somehow, someday, some way that bread could be considered evil, bad, wrong, whatever the case may be, right. It's crazy. And that's like Jesus calling himself a Democrat or something, or a Republican. There's no way. There's not a chance. So I have to unwind a lot of people's thinking about that. It doesn't take long, but a lot of times people are closed-minded to it, or they have already set a fixed opinion that they'll discard the text of the Bible in a heartbeat in order to keep their opinion. They're not closed. They're not open-minded about the whole thing. Or as they say in Romans 12:2, they don't know how to renew their mind.
So you talk about how to get good food, how to combine food and fitness. Maybe some Christian. Well, what's one Christian fitness technique?
So I would say, I say pretty simplistically, God tells us, to look at the sparrows and look at the kingdom of the world. When an ant is born, about 30 minutes after it's born, it can carry about 400 times its body weight for an hour. A kangaroo jumps about 30 feet, something like 12 times a minute, and it doesn't have a coach. It doesn't have an exercise regimen. And, if you look at the strongest human being ever, he lifted 3.5 times his body weight over his head, and he could hold it for up to 10 seconds. Up to 10 seconds. An elephant lifts half its body weight over its head, and it starts doing it at 6 months old, and it does it until it's 70. That's the fundamentals of nature we seem to avoid. We start choosing to get good at things that we're not really good. In fact, we're not even designed to be good at them. If you look at Canadian geese flying south for the winter, okay, the geriatrics are not 3 days behind the teenagers. They're all together as one. So I have to ask people, what are the things that you can be good at the same level throughout your whole life?
Yeah.
And therein lies the magic sauce that we're supposed to learn from the animal kingdom. I assure you, going to a building with heating and air will never develop the skills that God intended for you to be good at. 0% chance. But people get miffed by that because they see these incredible physiques. They get excited about bench pressing 167% of their body weight, and they think they've reached some sort of promised land. They fail to look at the ants. They fail to look at, a hummingbird or how much it can carry or how fast it can go. There's a video I used to show people when it was still on YouTube of Usain Bolt trying to catch his house cat. So the cat got out. The cat has no coach. The cat does not have a special diet. Usain Bolt is at maximum speed trying to chase the cat, and the cat has no issues whatsoever invading him.
Right.
So humans are not in general fast. That's not who we are. That's not what we're good at. Right. So I take people back. What are we good at? You say, take the David and Goliath story. It's the first story of fitness in the creation story. Well, you see it every time Tiger Woods hits a hole in one. When Tom Brady throws a 60-yard bomb and hits it in care, hits a guy in stride. When a hockey player does a slap shot at 100 miles an hour from 50 feet away and hits the upper corner 9 times out of 10, all of that is the story of David and Goliath. That's all this. It's just an extension of the story of David and Goliath. And that's who we are. That's what we're meant to do.
Okay. How long is this faith, food, and fitness program?
About 10 weeks. About 10 weeks.
It's a 10-week. Okay. And it's 8 to 10 people. And how often do you meet?
So I just finished a course, and I haven't set the dates yet for the next one, but I would imagine it'll be sometime in the June window. I have a lot of things. I have a lot of events going on between now and June.
Right.
I have a tour to Spain. I have a tour on the Blue Ridge Parkway. I have a national competition in Nebraska. I'm going fishing in Canada. And when all those are done, I'm probably going to offer the course again.
Okay. So be on the lookout for the Faith, Food, and Fitness class coming up June 2024.
Yeah, I would like to make a micro plug for something here. For a lot of people who would like to see the Himalaya with a person who can read, write, and speak the language of the people there, I have an open invitation for a fundraiser that I'm doing for the Fellowship of Christian Athletes. I'm going to be the incoming board chairman for the North Charlotte metro area. And I want to take 7 men trekking through the Himalaya. It's a 9-day trek. It starts and ends in Kathmandu. So you get yourself to Kathmandu and I'll do everything else from there. But we're going to walk 4 to 7 hours per day. You don't carry anything. I'm going to have Sherpas do that. And I'm going to take you through the Annapurna Sanctuary. We're going to stay at tea houses each day, look at the biggest mountains in the world. And each day I'll do a Bible lesson for you from Hebrew, from the original, and take you through the original words and help you understand some of the mysteries that you can't see if you do it in translation in the form of English.
Right.
And so that's open. I've already got some people, one person or 1 or 2 people committed to it. And you're going to have a little link that Brian will put here at the bottom that you can click on for more details and sign up.
So when is this being planned for?
Yeah, you need to leave the United States no later than October 1, and you'll be back in the United States on October 13.
And that's 2024.
Correct.
Okay. Yeah. We will put the link in the, you'll see it in the show notes below. Awesome. So anything else that you're doing right now that you'd want to share with our group?
I have some stuff I'm doing for personal growth, but as far as outreach goes and all that goes with it, I'm about to do a study with a dear friend of mine who loves Greek and I love Hebrew. We're going to do a deep dive into the book of Exodus on my podcast series on Threshold Stories. It'll take about a half dozen podcasts to do, but we're going to go through the lessons of Exodus and how they apply today. I'll be reading Exodus and bringing it over from the original language. And my friend Marty Cocking will be bringing over his understanding of Greek. and pulling in both some of Genesis into Exodus and bringing some of the foreshadowing from the New Testament at Exodus. And it's specifically going to be geared for businessmen who want to learn from the past.
Okay. So let me ask you, before we wrap things up here, what are like 3 words of wisdom or advice that you'd want to give to somebody right now who's struggling in their faith, either in the workplace or parenting, maybe single dads? I mean, what words of advice would you want to give to a Christian who is having to deal with issues in the workplace right now?
So there's a line in Exodus chapter 1, so it's real early on. And I believe it's verse 10. And it says, and there was a new Pharaoh, and he knew not Joseph. So it's one of the 10 most important verses in all of Scripture, and most people don't know that.
How so? How so is it important?
So most men, specifically men in the West, throw a very high priority on making sure that they're trying to impact the world that they live in when they go to work. So the lesson that God's trying to teach us there is that's hogwash. Moses showed up in the story of Exodus, but prior to Moses was Joseph. And if you know the story, Joseph saved Egypt. Egypt was the most powerful kingdom in the world. He saved them. He gave them life. He negotiated. He came out of horrible conditions and became the most trusted person to Pharaoh. He, got took them through famine, and they still remain the dominant force in the world.
Right.
New boss, who's Joseph? Totally forgotten. Yeah. He changed the freaking world. Joseph changed the world. He's in the Bible. New boss, and he's forgotten. Completely gone from all history in Egypt. Just like that. My calling and my recommendation for men is no matter what you think you're doing at work, no matter how much of an impact you think you're going to have, there's 2 things you can count on. 1, you will be forgotten.
Yeah. And
2, there's going to be a new boss. And it might be in the sequence of here's the new boss and who are you?
Right.
So regardless of your perception of you making an impact at work or not making an impact at work, just remember your business is not going to heaven. Heaven's designed only for people. There's no such thing as a Christian company. There are Christians in companies, right? But there's no space in heaven for Sears, Roebuck and Company. There is no Kmart of Christianity in heaven. We're all individuals make it or individuals don't. That's about it. But just keep in mind Exodus. There's going to be a new Pharaoh in your job, regardless of whatever the heck you think. You might be the Pharaoh, but there's still going to be a new one day. Right. And people are going to be forgotten. And that includes the people who truly changed everything.
Yeah. I know that I've coached leaders and so forth. And sometimes I almost feel like a life insurance agent when I start talking
That's
about
fair.
Exit strategies, right? Because it's like I've had people tell me, if I die, well, no, bro, there ain't no if associated with that. It's like if I leave, no, you will be leaving this position one day.
No matter what.
No matter what. So you're right. So the idea is to have eternal significance as opposed to worldly significyou, right? So that's good. Well, thank you, Jeff, for this time. I appreciate all of the things that you've given us today, and you're taking time out of your obviously very busy schedule to talk to us. So thank you, and to our listeners, thank you for listening. You can go to Google Play or iTunes, or download the Queen City Leaders app. You can go to CBMC Charlotte YouTube, obviously, get this and other great podcasts with other great interviewees, or go to the charlotte.cbmc.com website, where you can get all sorts of tools on how to help you be a better businessman as a Christian in the business world. Well, Charlotte CBMCers, that's all for this episode. I am your host, Brian Bratti. You've been listening to the Charlotte Christian Businessmen's Connection podcast. Until next time, God bless and Godspeed.
We hope you are blessed and encouraged by this episode. The Charlotte CBMC podcast is also available on the Queen City Leaders app. Now you can easily listen or watch and share these inspirational podcasts with others. Download the app at the Apple App Store or Google Play. For more information about Charlotte CBMC, simply type in the browser address line charlotte.cbmc.com. That's charlotte.cbmc.com. There you'll discover free resources to deepen your faith. Connect to one of the area's C3 groups that meet each week. For business owners, discover the Trusted Advisors Forum, where you can meet with other business owners and discuss how to grow your business spiritually. Finally, you'll learn about Charlotte CBMC sponsored events like the Queen City Leaders Summit Series. Please subscribe to this podcast so you'll know when new episodes are available. Like and share this podcast with other men and help us spread the good news of Jesus Christ throughout the Queen City. Join us again next time for a new episode of the Charlotte CBMC podcast. May you have a blessed and productive day working for the Lord. Thank you.